Well, welcome everyone. I am Heidi Klumpkin, League of Women Voters Minnesota Youth Civic Engagement Coordinator. We are so excited to be here with our first webinar in this series for youth who are interested in civic engagement and the adults that work with them. I have a few logistics and introductions, and then we will get started. So this is a Zoom webinar. So at the end of the presentation, it's actually a Zoom meeting, but you will be able to ask questions. If you have a question, you can raise your hand and we can call on you, or you can put your question in the chat and we will direct that to our speakers today. Please stay muted until the question time after both of our presenters have shared. We will be recording this session, but we'll stop before the questions for the safety and privacy of people on the call. Other Zoom best practices we have are you can turn on your own closed captions. Remember, those are auto-generated, so they might not be perfect. You can also pin our presenters so they stay large when they are presenting. If you hover over their image and click on the three dots, you can pin them at the top. Both presenters will take questions at the end. So again, please raise your hand if you have a question or put it in the chat. Also, please remember we want to respect your time, so we may not get to all questions today, but feel free to email me if you have further questions and we can direct them. Again, these will be recorded and presented later, shared later. So this is the first in a monthly series, so you can join us next month about ranked choice voting and voter education. I'll put the link in the chat in just a little bit. This webinar could not be possible without the work and feedback from our high school collaborative partners, Hennepin County elections, Minneapolis elections, YMCA, and also feedback from the Minnesota Office of the Secretary of State. Thank you so much for your input. I also know that so many of you are engaging with voter registration and education every day, especially today, National Voter Registration Day. Since I've started developing these programs, I've been so grateful to learn more about the organizations supporting civic engagement of young people. These organizations include groups like Sprockets, Believe in What's Possible, the Minnesota Youth Collective, and of course, our local League of Women Voters. As I mentioned multiple times, today is National Voter Registration Day. With a busy spring legislative session, who is eligible to register to vote has shifted for this election season. With Restore the Vote, 16 and 17-year-old pre-registration, and in 2024 automatic voter registration, we have some exciting election seasons ahead to see how this will impact voter turnout. Another impactful legislative item is the requirement of civics classes in the 11th or 12th grade for high school graduation. So the goal of today is to hear from Secretary of State Steve Simon and Representative Dean Erdahl about these updates and changes and learn more about the goals with this legislation. So thank you so much. I'm going to go through introducing our two speakers and then we will start with them. So Secretary of State Steve Simon is an elected official. Secretary Simon was sworn into office on January 5th, 2015, and is the Chief Elections Administrator who partners with township, city, and county officials to organize elections on behalf of Minnesota's nearly 4 million eligible voters and ensures that the election system is fair. Secretary Simon also oversees a wide range of services for Minnesota business. Before being elected in this role, Secretary Simon also served in the Minnesota House of Representatives, working on general election-related issues, and served as the Assistant Attorney General of Minnesota. Secretary Simon has also worked as a lawyer in private practice. So welcome, Secretary Simon. We're happy to have you here today. I'll introduce Representative Erdahl, and then we'll pass it off to you. Representative Dean Erdahl has been elected to the Minnesota House of Representatives to represent House District 16A. That includes Chippewa, Kandiyohi, McLeod, Meeker, Renville, and Wright counties. Representative Erdahl has been a member of the House of Representatives since 2003. Previously, Representative Erdahl has been an American history teacher and coach, and is also an author and a filmmaker. So excited to announce that. Representative Erdahl serves on the Capital Investment and Education Policy Committees. I'm also very familiar with Representative Erdahl's commitment to civics education, previously as a high school teacher, but as well through his work through the civics test requirement and now the civics requirement at grades 11th and 12th. So welcome, Representative Erdahl. We are so happy to have you here today. So I'm going to stop sharing now and ask that we welcome Secretary Simon to share about this legislation.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Got it. Okay. I must have been on mute for some reason. Thank you so much. And let me first in advance say you can see my glamorous background here. Um, this isn't how I planned it, but sometimes you just got to deal with the cards that you're dealt. So I hope you can tune that out. But it's a pleasure nonetheless to be with all of you, and a pleasure, I have to say, to be here alongside my former colleague in the Minnesota House, Dean Erdahl, who has been a really great ally to on a number of democracy issues. As you mentioned, he's a former teacher, classroom teacher, knows what he's talking about, and really commands a lot of respect on both sides of the aisle in the legislature. That was true when I served with him. It is definitely even more true, I'd say, today. So it's great to be with Representative Erdahl. I wanted to introduce or reintroduce myself to some of you. Thanks for the introduction. As you heard in the introduction, our office, of course, has a lot of responsibility. The Office of Secretary of State, some of them are found in state statute, some in the Minnesota Constitution. But I'm here obviously because of the responsibility or the duty that tends to get the most interest, the most attention, and yes, the most scrutiny, which is the business of overseeing Minnesota's elections. And it's a pleasure to do that work. I like to say that I and we are in the democracy business. And I think you'll agree that recently it has been really a very interesting time to be in the democracy business. There's no question about that. But I wouldn't want to be in that business in any other place other than Minnesota, because as many of you know, thanks in no small part to the League of Women Voters, by the way, over many, many years, Minnesota is an overachiever. We really are good at voting. We're really, really good at it. And that's been the case no matter which political party has held sway or been in charge of this or that, the legislature, the Office of Secretary of State, it doesn't matter. And in three out of the past four elections, we were number one in the United States in voter turnout, including the COVID election of 2020, when there was a lot of anxiety, uncertainty, even fear in some quarters. And yet somehow we managed to rally as a state, and people really turned up and showed up and stepped up. And I think that says a lot about us. I like to say that 2020 was sort of the ultimate stress test, and that Minnesota didn't just pass that test, Minnesota aced that test. And that says a lot about us. And I get asked from time to time, more than from time to time, I get asked fairly often why it is that I think that Minnesota excels when it comes to voting, why it is that no matter where you are in the state, rural, urban, suburban, people really do turn out routinely to vote in such high numbers. And I think there isn't one pat answer, one simple answer, but surely among the major contributing factors, at least in my view, is that we have rules of the road that are really good. We have laws in Minnesota that are really good and have been for decades. Again, regardless of which party is in charge, put there by Democrats, put there by Republicans, put there, over the years. And what we've built, I think, in Minnesota is what makes us, the envy of the country in many ways. It's always a balance, right? And reasonable people can have a different opinion on what the balance is. But the ultimate goal, I think, for most people in elections is to find that balance between access and security. You want it to be as accessible as it can be, but you want it to be accessible as it can be only for eligible voters. You don't want ineligible voters basically taking away others' right to vote. And I think in Minnesota, we have gotten that balance right. There's no such thing as perfection, but I think we've overall gotten that balance right. And, you know, when it comes to youth civic engagement in particular, and Representative Erdahl is no stranger to this, as he has been a champion, not only of the civics requirement, but of another new piece of law that I'm going to be talking about. I think Minnesota has also gotten it right. In 2022, in the last election, we were third in the country for youth voter turnout, which is really, really good. We're aiming for number one this next time in 2024, but we were third in youth voter turnout. That is defined as ages 18 to 29. So that's a pretty broad age range, but I think we do pretty well. Doesn't mean we can rest on our laurels, doesn't mean we don't have anything else to do. But I think that's a testament to a good system. And our office does a robust a program of voter outreach. Obviously, we never talk about who to vote for or what party or what issue. It's all about just voting, plain old voting, what the rules are, making sure people understand what they are. This year, though, as you alluded to in the introduction. And I think the reason we're here in part is because this was a very active legislature on a number of issues, but particularly on democracy issues. And I just wanted to highlight for your benefit some of the changes that we have that came out of the 2023 legislative session having to do with democracy, having to do with enfranchisement, that I think, in my opinion, are going to serve us very, very well. And let me just make a note. Every single reform that I'm about to talk about, every single new law, is nonpartisan in origin and nonpartisan in effect. So every one of these are things that other states have done, including so-called red states, including so-called blue states or purple states. So we're by no means a pioneer here. I mean, Minnesota is a leader, but I would say in these issues, on these particular issues, other states of varying political complexions have done these things and done them really well, I think. So let me start out with one that has garnered a lot of headlines. It's not necessarily directly oriented towards youth, although it can be. And I think indirectly, there are a lot of young people who might be inspired by this kind of thing or know people who are affected. And that is that the legislature made the decision this year, after discussion going back, man, at least 10 or a dozen or more years, made the decision to restore the right to vote to people who have left prison behind. We joined states like North Dakota, states like Indiana, Iowa is heading in that direction, Florida, and others, states of varying political complexions. And that is 55,000 people in Minnesota who before June 1st didn't have the right to vote and now do with the stroke of a pen. The challenge going forward is making sure they know about it. These are 55,000 people who have done their time. They've been out for years and in some cases decades, and now they have that freedom to vote back. And the big challenge, as I say, is just to make sure they know it. No one in Minnesota or America has to vote, of course, but we want to make sure they understand they have the option to vote. And I think the league and others have been great partners in just simply trying to get the word out. And it's going to be, challenging work, but it has to be done, I think, especially as we head into the presidential election year. Another one that I want to talk about is the reform that's known as automatic voter registration. I say that because I wish that reform went by another name. I think the word automatic throws a lot of people, and I don't blame them. When I hear the word automatic in daily life, I'm thinking, okay, this is a robot or a computer program, like humans aren't involved, it's automatic. But no, this is just a gloss on what we already have in state law. Before this legislative session, we already had a motor voter law, so-called. Most states do, almost every state does. Meaning that when you go and get your driver's license or renew your driver's license, you're asked the question on a form, do you want to be registered to vote? And the reason those two transactions go together is the very same information you'd be supplying to get or renew a driver's license is the same as what you would need to register to vote, namely a showing that you are who you say you are and you live where you say you live. And so that's been our tradition for a long time, since the early 90s. What automatic voter registration does, there's nothing automatic about it. Real flesh and blood human beings are still sifting and sorting and screening. It just means the presumption is reversed. So now when you go in and renew or get a driver's license, the presumption is, without having to check a box, that you do wish to be registered to vote. And that only happens if you're otherwise eligible. Obviously, if you're over 18, obviously, if you're a US citizen and you're a resident of Minnesota and so forth. And you can always opt out. The voter can always say a month later or a year later, I don't want to do this, take me off the list. So that's what automatic voter registration is. And I think it has a couple of effects. One is it's going to get many of the 500,000 or so Minnesotans who are eligible but unregistered, it's going to get them registered. Now, that doesn't mean they'll vote, but it means they're at least in a better position to vote because they'll be on the voting rolls. It will also, at least in my judgment, clean up the voter rolls, make them even more clean than they are. And the reason for that is we'll have far less reliance on same day or election day voter registration. We believe it will reduce that by about 80 or 90%, meaning people will have been in the system for weeks and more likely months in advance of election day, and they won't have need to register same day. That means the filtering and the screening can be done earlier. But last but not least, I want to mention something that's particularly focused on youth. And Representative Erdahl, for a number of years, was the chief sponsor, the chief author of this legislation in the Minnesota House of Representatives, testified before it, got others to testify for it. And so I don't want to step on his toes here. I seek to compliment him. But that reform is pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, pre-registration. Now, this is really, again, only a modification, when you think about it, of what we have been doing for some time. As Representative Erdahl frequently had pointed out in legislative hearings, we already for many years had a law on the books that said if you're 17 but will be 18 by the next election, you can in essence get in line to register, which is what pre-registration is. It isn't actually registration, it's getting in line. It's filling out the form so that someone, a real human being, not a computer, will vet and screen and see if the applicant is who they say they are and lives where they say they live. So this now says instead of just 17-year-olds who will be 18, it's all 17-year-olds and all 16-year-olds can now pre-register to vote. And it's the very same thing. It's nothing different from registering to vote. And if you go to our website, which is mnvotes.gov, you'll see you just have to provide personal identifying information, your name, your date of birth, your address, obviously, and then either a driver's license or state ID number or part of a social security number. And most people can do all this in 1 or 2 minutes tops. So it gets folks in line to be registered to vote. And the idea is if everything checks out, then without having to do anything, without having to think about anything else, that person, that applicant will on their 18th birthday automatically be added to the voter rolls, which is great. And I think the advantage from the standpoint of youth civic engagement is it gets our young people, it gets 16 and 17-year-olds thinking about themselves as voters before they even are voters. And we know from studies that have been done all over this country that when that happens, it is far more likely that someone will vote that first time they're eligible at 18, 19, 20, or whatever. And if that happens, if they do vote that first time they're eligible, they are far more likely to make it a lifelong habit. So that I think is good for everyone. It gets those good habits started early. And by the way, this isn't just happy talk. This isn't just wishful thinking. This isn't just a feel-good bill. As Representative Erdahl knows, there are studies, really respected studies, that show a link, that show a connection, that show a connecting of the dots between pre-registration and an actual uptick in youth voting. There's a connection. It's not just wishful thinking and something you feel good voting for and you're not sure if it'll ever result in anything. That's no guarantee it'll happen in Minnesota, but in states like Hawaii and Florida and others, I remember one study in particular, they've shown that. So I think this is a great tool. It's a great tool for those who work with our young people in high school to get people interested and engaged in voting. And I think what's important about that is I've learned over the years in this job, because one of the things that we've done in our voter outreach team is we started in 2016 a mock election for high school students. Now it's been expanded to all students, and we do it with partners like YMCA Youth in Government. One of the things I discovered, and that we all discovered, is you'd be surprised with high school students, you know, how complicated they believe voting is, and how once they discover what it really is, how thrilled they are. So, for example, I mean, I can't tell you how many times a teacher or an administrator or a student has said to me or folks in our office, "Wow, this is great. I didn't realize you just fill in a bubble. I had no idea. I thought there was spelling involved. I thought I was going to have to write something. I had no idea. Oh, it's like a standardized test. I just fill in a bubble. Nobody ever told me that. I didn't know. Why would I know?" So those kinds of this is a great hook to talk about those things, to talk about elections in whatever way makes curricular sense for a particular school district. I'm not here to tell them how to talk about it or what they say or what tools they use, but it is a tool now to tell 16 and 17-year-olds. One final thing I want to say, and something that as I go around the state, I've been talking about a lot. It's not necessarily new, but I think since we're in an election season now in some places in Minnesota, and shortly will be for all of us in the presidential election year of 2024, I always, when I talk to young audiences, high school, college, etc., I always emphasize the opportunity to be an election judge. As many of you know, in Minnesota, we call poll workers election judges. They don't wear black robes, they don't have a gavel, but for some reason, that's the term that we've called them for many, many years. And what a lot of folks don't realize is you can do that job as of age 16 in Minnesota. You can be a student election judge trainee as of age 16 and 17 in the state of Minnesota, and it's paid. It's a paid job. You even get paid for the 2 hours of training that are required. So the training and the actual job are paid opportunities. It's a great possible resume builder. It's a great opportunity to be on the front lines of democracy and get that experience. You have to get released from school or work to do that job. And it's just a wonderful opportunity. And another thing that a lot of people of any age don't realize is there are very few geographic restrictions. For 16 and 17-year-olds, the rule is you can do it anywhere in your county or any adjacent county, any county that touches your county. So if you live in city of Minneapolis and you go to the city elections department and say, hey, I'd like to be an election judge, and they say, I'm sorry, we're full. We've gotten all the people we need. That's okay. You can go to Minnetonka or Hopkins or Edina or Brooklyn Park, or you can go over to Ramsey County in any city there. So a lot of people assume that it has to be the place you live or even the county that you live, but it doesn't. If you're 18 and over, there are no geographic restrictions in Minnesota. It doesn't have to be the county touching yours. So if you live in Duluth and you want to be an election judge in Minneapolis and they'll have you, you can do it. There's no restriction whatsoever. So I always, when I talk to young people, like to emphasize that as well. And there's been some real buzz and interest around that. After all, we need 30,000 people, 30,000 every November, even year election to do that job, to step up and stand up and do that. And so we always appreciate the opportunity. So that is, in a nutshell, at least how I see the new landscape. Those are the things that pertain maybe most closely to our youngest voters or would-be voters. And I'm excited about the opportunity as we approach a presidential election year. There'll be a lot to be passionate about and excited about, no matter where someone sits or stands politically. We hope people channel that passion into voting, and particularly our youngest people. And again, we're shooting for number one. Number three was great. It's great to be on the Olympic medal stand. We love our bronze medal. We're going for gold in 2024.
Well, great. I'm so excited. Thank you so much. I do have one more question before we switch gears to Representative Erdahl. I know, as we've mentioned, today's National Voter Registration Day, and I was
Right.
with you at a high school earlier today, and I know you were talking to a couple others. How many locations have you visited today?
So today, in terms of schools, I went to 2 high schools and the University of Minnesota.
Okay.
I
But
had
you've got
other
a couple more
things as
scheduled
well.
this week, I know too.
Yes, we do have a couple. So I'll be at one high school tomorrow, another one on Friday. I don't think any on Thursday, but we're making the rounds. I was in Albert Lee a couple of weeks ago. I was in Rochester last week at 2 different schools. So, really spreading the word, particularly about pre-registration, since it really is an opportunity to engage and have a conversation and get people, as I said, thinking about themselves as voters before they are. And again, hat tip to Representative Erdahl, who carried this for many years and really had a unique perspective and persuasiveness about him, because he, unlike I, has classroom teaching experience. He could really speak to what this might mean for actual students, and he has an insight into the minds of students for obvious reasons.
Well, thank you so much for taking this time. Can you stay with us until the end to answer questions later on?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So we'll switch gears now to Representative Erdahl. We welcome you to put up your slideshow again, and it might take us a minute to get that. And then we'll get started and hear about this requirement for civics education in 11th and 12th grade.
You have it?
No, you have to hit the share screen.
That's what I thought. Where's the shares? Oh, back here. Share screen.
Yes.
Oh, there it is. Hey, this is easy.
You do it once, you're an expert, right?
No. All right. Before I get into this, just like to talk a little bit in more general terms. First of all, and Secretary Simon will appreciate this, knowing my political history in the legislature. Yesterday was National Cheeseburger Day.
Haha.
I celebrated that one. I once had a bill dubbed the cheeseburger bill, which basically said that if you eat too many cheeseburgers at a fast food place and get fat, you can't sue them. It's your fault. So that one actually passed both houses, then got vetoed by Governor Dayton. So I've kind of given up on it. But yesterday we had to commemorate. And I have enjoyed serving in various ways with Secretary Simon over the years. What year did you get elected again, Steve?
2004.
Yeah, yeah. After I was in 2002, so just a couple years later, Representative then Simon joined us, and I served on committees with him. I served on a committee that he chaired, the elections committee at that time, and we share a passion for getting people involved in our political process and getting people voting. Um, as he has indicated several times, the voter registration for 16, 17-year-olds, I initiated, carried the first time and did for several times. It was just difficult at that time to get it passed, even though, like with 17-year-olds, I pointed out that basically, unless you were born in November or December, you can already register. Just 2 months of 17-year-olds were being excluded. And I'm glad that finally changed. And also that eventually now we have the 16-year-olds as well. So I think those were important to finally get done, and glad that I had some role in getting the ball rolling on this years ago. I was a teacher for 35 years at New London Spicer. For 4 of the years I've been in the legislature, I overlapped with teaching, tried to do both for a time, and over the years tried to do things to increase voter electoral participation with my students. Back in the early days of my teaching career, I brought a busload of students from New London Spicer to a speech in St. Paul by Governor Walter Hickel, then had been the governor of Alaska, and then Secretary of the Interior under President Nixon. He was the last into Nixon's cabinet and the first to be fired. And I brought him in to speak at a rally in St. Paul. We had a little counter night that night, a little bit different thing. Another event was being held by the Republican Party, and I held my off-campus event with Hickel. And so I've brought students out in various campaign activities, not for credit, you volunteer to do these things, and enjoyed, since I had basically a lifelong interest in political involvement, I enjoyed trying to involve students. And in my classroom, when I taught civics education, we would break the school up into electoral districts. So if you were a classroom, you were assigned a certain number of electoral votes to help them understand how presidential elections work a little bit better. And then you'd have the vote in the class, obviously, and that vote would determine how many electoral votes they got. And so just one of the, I guess, a little bit out of the ordinary things that I did in teaching. But when I was in the legislature, now in starting my 22nd year, it became more and more obvious over the years that something needed to be done about civics, that things weren't going so well nationally and in the state of Minnesota. And so I'm going to go through my PowerPoint on this with you. Some of these pages I'm just going to kind of skip through because it doesn't apply quite so much since we actually passed it this last year. I will say that as one of the steps in getting to this stage, I several years ago managed to get a civics test based on the naturalization test that immigrants take past the Minnesota House. And so that was in effect about 5 years, I think. It had, well, it's no longer required. Is one of the things that happened in putting this bill together. You give and take, you compromise, and I lost the civics test and gained other things that I thought were more important. However, just because we lost the test doesn't mean that it's not still going to be given. I mean, obviously, if you're teaching civics, you should be testing civics, and I'm sure that the tests that we developed will be used by some. So with that, all right. Now this should move, right? There it is. Okay. Former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor stated, "We are facing a crisis in civics education." And the National College Board reports that the most important skills correlated with success in college are computer science and the United States Constitution. But in recent polls, 77% of Americans between 18 and 34 can't name even one of their U.S. senators. 2/3 of Americans can name at least one judge on American Idol. 15% can name the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. 2/3 of Americans can name only one branch of our government. 1/3 can't name any. One of my goals in doing this was at the end to make sure that Minnesota students can list more presidents than Kardashians. I will also say that when I brought this bill on civics before the legislative committees and such, that Secretary Simon did participate by testifying for this bill. The National Education and the National Association of Education Progress, NAEP, the nation's report card, reported that 3rd graders show progress in civics knowledge. In 8th grade, the knowledge level flatlines. Civics in Minnesota is mostly taught in the 9th grade, and our seniors graduate with less than 25% proficiency in civics education. So actually over 75% are failing. They're graduating from our high schools not knowing how our government works. And so I felt some changes needed to be made. Now, why is this? Well, there's a focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, that's pushed out civics and history. Now, certainly, STEM is important, but when you add something, then something else is removed, and we have to achieve a better balance. Nordic educators work hard to cultivate each student's connection to their nation. We largely fail to identify in national terms. Local school boards have challenges in balancing their curricula, trying to bring in everything, and sometimes a weightlifting course is in great demand or something. We have to prioritize, not just what does everyone want to learn, but what do they need to learn. When taught effectively, civics can equip students with the knowledge and dispositions necessary to become involved and engaged citizens. And just to give you one other example here, STEM receives from the federal government about $50 a student per year, and civics a nickel. So what's happening now? Former Senator Larry Pressler, now a college professor, commented about high school civics. They're not learning it there. It isn't being taught. In Minnesota, we require 3.5 credits of social studies, encompassing at least United States history, geography, government, and citizenship, world history, and economics, sufficient to satisfy all of the academic standards in social studies. But there was no assigned credit requirement to teach civics in Minnesota. Civics was supposed to be taught, but we couldn't guarantee it. Former Minnesota Supreme Court Justice Paul Anderson said that civics education currently suffers from malnutrition, and we need to restore its health. Proper civics education is a key ingredient to our country's future. We need educated citizens if we want to continue to live in a democratic society that cherishes life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A former chief judge of the Minnesota 8th Judicial District, Mike Thompson, said, "In my role as a district court judge, I saw on a daily basis people who have basically no understanding of how our system of government is set up. There's a lack of awareness that the legislature enacts laws, not the governor or the courts. There's essentially no awareness of what separation of powers means. Priority has been placed on the 3 R's and now the sciences. These are important, but for our society to survive, it is also important that our citizens understand the basic concepts of our Constitution and government structure. Dr. Steve Young, former dean of the Hamlin Law School. There may be nothing more important for the future of our country than teaching skills on how to work together for the greater good of all. Nothing is more important in public education today than civics. So I mentioned the civics test. We don't require it anymore in Minnesota, but again, if you are requiring that a class be taken, it is valid to assume that a test is going to be given. Now, okay, I'm not going to go through the attempted reforms because we don't need to. We've reached some high level of success here. Now, there was opposition, the school boards, secondary school principals, the Minnesota Association of School Administrators. You know, they want to teach it in ninth grade. My whole point was that you need a class for credit, you know, credit assigned to it to make it more relevant. So that's one reason why the bill says it has to be a class for credit. And the other is in ninth grade, frankly, I don't believe that students are ready to learn it. I mean, it's being backed up by the NAEP scores, by what we're seeing. It's not being learned for whatever reason. And I believe that if you teach it to juniors or seniors, possibly even 10th graders, it's going to be more meaningful. These are students who are registering to vote. They are registering for selective service. They're getting their driver's licenses. They are starting to take on the roles of a full-fledged citizen. And it's more meaningful for them to learn it then, and they will learn it more readily because of that. Business groups, Learning Law and Democracy. Thank you, League of Women Voters, provided a lot of support to this. I worked actually fairly closely with some League of Women Voters members on getting this done. These are some of the reasons why there was opposition. Disrupts current social studies sequencing. Well, again, I just said it makes more sense to offer courses of those who are about ready to become voters. So I'm not going to dwell so much on the opposition and rebuttals because I won. And, you know, electives are restricted for juniors or seniors. Well, a lot of schools offer 40 to 60 electives and still teach civics to juniors and seniors. What I attempted to do was being done in some schools. One thing that we did do, one of the compromises, is to say that students are exempted from civics courses if they are in honors or other high-level courses, baccalaureate, college in the classroom, those types of things. If they already have a high-level civics course, then they don't have to take the singular course being offered. There's still a lot of flexibility. The state of Minnesota is responsible for requiring that fundamental knowledge be taught. And as I said to superintendents and principals, you're supposed to do this. And if you want to do it, you can do it. So what do we gain through civics education? We narrow the opportunity gap. We increase participation and engagement in our democracy. We empower minorities. We teach how to obtain change using our Constitution and our democratic process. And we learn to understand more about how current events are impacted. So these are just some comments here. I'll finish up with what I've been saying. Civics knowledge is fundamental to our success as a state and nation. We are failing to adequately teach civics in Minnesota. If we continue to teach as it is being taught now, we will continue to fail. And again, this was a bipartisan effort to get this done. It started out, the civics test passed when Republicans were in control of the House. The provision that I managed to get passed last year happened with Democrats in control of both the House and the Senate. In fact, strangely, the year before, we were poised to get this passed. It had passed in the House, and with Republicans in control of the Senate, I thought we could get it through there, but it was blocked by one senator, and so it failed in that year. But again, last year, Democrats in control with strong Republican support as well, we managed to pass it. So I think this is, if you want to look back on how to compromise, how to get people together, this bill is a good example of how to put something together over the years. And obviously persistency is a big part of it, because it took me 7 years to get this through. So I think that's pretty much what I'll go through with the PowerPoint, and welcome any comments or questions.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. We do have a lot of questions that have come in the chat for both Representative Erdahl and Secretary Simon. But before we get started on those, Representative Erdahl, I wanted to ask you one question to transition, and that is, I am also a former teacher, and every year until about 3 years ago, I really missed in August setting up my classroom and going there. How much do you ever miss teaching so much that you would go back into the classroom, either as a full-time teacher or a substitute?
No. Actually, no. Let me qualify that a little bit. I go to classrooms. I mean, I was actually this afternoon speaking to sixth graders in Montevideo, and I feel I'm, through various means, continuing to educate, continuing to inform. But just today, I thought, I was talking to teachers, and I said to them, maybe I should just come back a couple times and substitute, just to see how it's going now compared to when I was teaching. And there's a chance that locally I might make that appearance, but I wouldn't bet a whole lot on it.
Yeah, I feel you. I still maintain my teaching license just in case.
You know what? They don't care anymore.
Oh, for subbing, yeah.
Yeah, for subbing, they don't care.
Yeah.
They just, if you are alive and not before, you're a high commodity.